So this month, we're traveling to New Zealand. Who's excited? It's sunny and warm down there. Um, as I was saying, hopefully most of you or all of you got your yarn. It's this beautiful New Zealand sport. Um, it's a natural kind of taupey brown, which we are all loving here. Um, it has a little bit of like a lavender or ash brown color in it. And I just want to say right off the bat, so no one is confused, this is not a breed. Like New Zealand is not a breed of sheep. So while most of the time we are shipping breed specific or breed blends, this is another yarn like the Punta Arenas that we did in the spring, where the fiber is a geographic, has geographic origins that make for specific qualities of the fiber that distinguish it from other yarns from similar animals. Does that make sense? So they have similar animals there, but those animals produce different fiber, slightly different fiber, because they live in New Zealand and feed on New Zealand grass and water and the like. So I'm going to start out today talking not so much about the wool right off the bat, but about the sheep industry, sheep and wool industry in New Zealand, because so it's we're gonna take a little wandering path to the wool, but it's good to know the background. And as far as I know, you guys have always been really interested in this kind of history component of where the wool comes from. And because we're talking about a geographic product, I thought we could start out with the history and go from there. So sheep farming was first introduced to New Zealand by Captain James Cook in 1773, and it mostly developed in the eastern region of the South Island of New Zealand. New Zealand has two big land masses. You know what I can't figure out? Maybe someone can answer this. This might be a really dumb question, but when they say eastern, do they mean eastern as you're facing from the equator down, or eastern as you're facing the whole world with the North Pole at the top and the South Pole at the bottom? I don't know. But if anyone knows and can fill me in, that would be great.
Like
I meant to Google it. I meant to Google it and I forgot.
like the sun rises on the east the same way it does here.
Okay. All right. So the eastern region of the South Island has prime natural features for raising sheep. There's good rainfall, adequate open land, and fertile soil. And if you remember back to a couple of sheep that we've studied from Australia, or that originated in Australia, one of the problems with raising sheep in Australia is that the land has become overgrazed and very dry and hot. It's very dry and hot there. So there are challenges with actually feeding sheep in Australia. And in contrast, New Zealand is more lush, especially in the eastern region. So anyway, Captain Cook brought some sheep there, and two of the sheep that he brought were merinos. So he introduced merinos through the Marlborough Sounds in the eastern region of New Zealand. And while those two sheep didn't live, forever, or even maybe very long, it did take the work of all the settlers kind of getting together to establish a successful flock. First breeding merinos and then other sheep breeds as they were imported into the country and as they were developed into the country. So by the 1850s, though, sheep farming was booming, and for the next 130 years, it was New Zealand's primary agricultural industry. Since the 1850s, sheep farming has been New Zealand's most important industry, and from the mid 1880s, the wool industry dominated most of their agricultural earnings. Again, full on into well into the 20th century. So from the mid 1880s right up until about the year 2000, they had a lot of it was a successful economic venture to be in sheep farming, to stay in sheep farming, and adjacently to be in the wool industry. In the 20th century, New Zealand sheep were raised mostly for the production of meat exports into the British market, with wool as a secondary product, but still a product that was high in demand by the British Empire. And New Zealand's sheep industry hit its peak during the post-World War II period. So between late 1940s through 1960, during the baby boomer years, and also during those years, the Korean War caused a great demand for wool, and New Zealand and Australia filled a lot of that need. Then by the 1970s, New Zealand sheep numbers started to decline and wool prices plummeted, just like they did all around the world. But especially for places far away from Europe and the United States and Asia, the energy crises in the 1970s, there were two of them, one or in the early 70s and one in the late 70s, really battered the ability for farmers in New Zealand and Australia to export their wool and transport it around the world. So sheep farmers had to adapt and respond to changes in the global economy, as well as variations beginning to happen in their own climate. In the 1980s, New Zealand was one of the only economies in the world that still had its exports dominated by primary commodities, like farm produce and things like that. Though there was increased industrialization within New Zealand, the manufacturing sector functioned primarily to support domestic production, and New Zealand's economy faced soaring unemployment, plummeting profits, and especially in the export market, again, due to not just the energy crisis, but the following huge increases in fuel and the huge costs associated with shipping goods out. So in order to make that profitable, in order to make exporting profitable, you have to be exporting a lot to take advantage of the energy costs that you're paying for. After the Korean wool boom kind of dissipated, sheep numbers had decreased by more than half in New Zealand, what they were in the 1980s. And as of June 2020, New Zealand recorded its lowest number of sheep of the decade. Of that number, only 5% are merino sheep breed. Compared to meat production, only a small number of sheep are raised for wool. The decline of the wool industry is partly attributed to the rising competitiveness of plastic and synthetics that offer cheaper prices compared to wool. And farmers struggle because of that to sell wool at a good price, just like they do really all around the world. There are, like many farmers everywhere, running perpetual deficit as costs continue to exceed profits. And like many farmers here in America, some farmers are unable to sell out their wool. And we recently had a similar discussion about apples. Like there are many farm commodities that are being produced, in amounts that can't be absorbed. And so there's, farmers are stockpiling it, which, isn't great for the wool and kind of causes prices to go down even more. Another major cause of declining sheep numbers is the lack of available land, because dairy farming, horticulture farming, and, building housing for humans has increased significantly in New Zealand, again, like in many parts of the world. It's reported that in 2020, dairying has replaced sheep farming in New Zealand as the dominant production. That said, they're still predicting an increase in the production of wool fiber as we progress toward the 2030s, because wool breeding areas are actually exposed to some positive impacts of climate change. Warming and rainfall changes and things like that are actually benefiting the sheep industry. So wool producing areas of New Zealand's west, which compared to the eastern areas was very dry and hot, are predicted to receive increased rainfall and rising minimum temperatures in winter. More water for pasture production and maintaining livestock will have positive effects on the growing industry. That said, then the eastern wool growing regions are expected to see decreasing rainfall, and that will have its own implications for the traditional farm areas of New Zealand and the quality and the quantity of wool production. New Zealand wool is mainly exported as fiber, so about 80% of it being sent overseas in a greasy state, and some of it, the other 20%, clean wool fiber. It is processed into three major product categories, and this is offshore, as finished wool fiber, carpets, and yarn. And you see a lot of advertising in the rug and blanket industry for New Zealand wool rugs, New Zealand wool blankets. And that's what this is referring to. Lots of times those products are made in China or in other places, but the wool is coming from New Zealand, probably because it can be obtained very inexpensively and it is good quality. So what wool farmers are seeing from this this trend is an opportunity to add more value to their wool domestically. So instead of just shearing it and shipping it off in a dirty state and getting the lowest amount of money for it, what can New Zealanders do in their industry and their farming practices to increase the value before it leaves New Zealand? The volume of wool exports reflects production, with 75% of exports being in 2024, that's this year, being strong wool. Strong wool refers to, wool is generally divided into three main classes of fiber type. There's very soft, fine wool, medium wool, and strong wool. Strong wool is coarser. That refers to, for everyone here who, has been, coming along with us for the longer journey in Barn Box, is your long wools and coarse wools, and those are generally the kinds of wools that are used in rugs and blankets. Medium and fine wools are used more in the clothing industry. So 75% of the exports from New Zealand in 2024 are strong wool. Fine wool accounts for around 10% by volume, but contributes about 30% by value in wool fiber exports. And what's really interesting, and I'll go back over this number later, but in New Zealand, more than 65% of the wool produced is considered strong wool. It's New Zealand Romney and other long wool, strong wool breeds. So only about 5 to 10% of their sheep population is merino, but they're exporting, but it makes up 10% of their wool exports and brings in 30% of the profit that of the entire profit is 30% of it is from merino. So even a small amount of merino can add a lot of value to what you're exporting. China, excuse me, China is the major export destination for New Zealand fiber and has been for many decades. There it is often processed or into semi-finished or finished goods, mainly, like I said, carpets and rugs for local and export markets. The volume sent to different markets has varied over time, and China has gone from taking like 57% of the New Zealand exports in 2015 to 37% in 2024. So that's a big drop in just 10 years, but that is the story of the commodities market. The use of commodities varies a lot from year to year, and it can bounce around quite a bit. In the meantime, though, India has been growing as a destination for New Zealand wool, and their imports of wool from New Zealand have increased by about 40% just from 2023 to 2024. So that's a huge change in just 1 year. And it means an immediate rescue from the decrease of interest from China. So the commodities markets do bounce around, and they can balance each other most of the time. UK and EU countries are historical trading partners as well, going way back to the first development of the sheep industry in the lands down under. But the absorption by the UK and Europe is declining, mainly because their manufacturing ability is declining. It's not that people in Europe and Great Britain are less interested in wool or less interested in wearing it. In fact, there has been a really big push in Great Britain to recognize the value of British wools, and to a definite steer in the UK and the EU toward natural fiber clothing, which is much more eco-friendly. In addition to all that, New Zealand does benefit from free trade agreements with most of its import and export partners. So that always greases the wheel for solid trade with other countries and continuing trade. There's no centralized data for domestic use of New Zealand wool, but available information tells us that around 15 tons of clean wool is currently used domestically to manufacture products for local and export markets. This is so, in other words, 15 tons, which to be honest, I don't know what percentage of the total wool production that represents, but 15 tons goes directly into New Zealand-based industry for making finished goods, like, again, carpets and fabrics and upholsteries and clothing, and which yarn, the yarn for the carpet industry does dominate that. It kind of makes you wonder, like, I mean, how much carpet are we using? Do humans use? Apparently a lot. And other core products for bedding and furniture and things like that. But there is a growing domestic interest and use of wool that's beginning to happen, and is also projected across a number of different products, including things like acoustic paneling, insulation for houses, ceiling tiles, as well as new commercial products that are in early development. And some of you who have been with us a really long time might remember that we've done fibers that we've done yarn products that share uses with the fiber optics industry. So there were fiber in our yarns that is also used in fiber optics and very high tech systems that the military might employ, things like that. So companies are experimenting with the companies in New Zealand are experimenting with developing products using wool fiber that can cross traditional boundaries and be really new. The projections that they're making around product development are based on products already in market or close to commercialization. So Wool Impact being an organization that it's a New Zealand-based organization, Wool Impact, and they're committed to supporting domestic manufacturing and brands to make ambitious projects a reality by sourcing funding and giving grants and supporting with marketing and things like that, people who are innovating with wool. New Zealand wool is also renowned for high quality and durability, but the ethical practices behind its production is what truly sets New Zealand wool apart. Ensuring that wool is cruelty-free and produced with the highest standards of animal welfare is a priority for many New Zealand farmers and has been for a number of decades. Wool is a great choice for brands that seek a natural, renewable, high-performance material for their products. And as demands and innovations with wool grow, growers desire to provide the assurance that New Zealand wool is ethically produced and traceable back to its sources, so that the commercial brands that use the wool can assure customers and stakeholders that of the responsible sourcing practices. New Zealand has a program called the New Zealand Farm Assurance Program. It's one of the world's first national assurance programs for wool. And as a voluntary nationwide farm assurance program, it promotes an authentic and independently verified best practice standard for raising animals and for raising animals in an outward facing way for international customers. Wool produced and certified under this standard comes with the assurance that animal health and welfare, biosecurity, origin, and traceability are among the world's best. It provides confidence that brand reputation is protected, quality is maintained through traceability, and that the attributes of the program can be promoted to their customers. And I just want to say, traceability is being able to not just trace a product along its chain of care, from the consumer back to the source, but also the ability to trace the lineage of an animal so that you can be assured that the genetics are both healthy and intact, that you're not getting half-bred merino when a label says merino, that it is whatever the breed standard is, 85% merino genetics, for instance. For growers, the assurance program provides security that their reputation is safeguarded, that the quality of care is maintained throughout the market chain, and that they can promote their responsible wool with pride. All wool certified through New Zealand Farm Assurance Program is from livestock cared for under the 5 freedoms, being free from discomfort, free from pain, injury, and disease, free to behave naturally, free from fear and distress, and free from thirst, hunger, and malnutrition. Certified farmers are required to have an animal health management plan, and meet New Zealand's strict animal welfare regulations that exclude the use of mulesing. Mulesing is a practice of, okay, so before sheep give birth, before lambing occurs in the spring, female sheep are it's very healthy and good for the sheep to clear their rear end area of excess dirty wool. And by shaving it away, which is called breeching, or a more cruel industry practice was mulesing, which is actually stripping the skin away all around that area so that the wool could not even grow back. It's probably very painful, and it was in high use for many ranchers, and it kind of caught the attention of the animal welfare community, and there's been a push to diminish or eradicate the use of mulesing in favor of something else. So that's what that is. Let's see, where was I here? So throughout New Zealand, mulesing is banned, and the farm assurance program checks for that and makes sure that that's that continues. The program also certifies that wool is from the sheep raised in New Zealand on pasture-based farming systems. Farmers are audited every 3 years by independent audit and certification body against the standards. Wool that is sold as being certified under the New Zealand Farm Assurance Program has to go through facilities that have been audited to ensure the chain of custody to ensure that the chain of custody is. This provides full traceability from export back to the farm. The program and independent audit body are under the government-appointed Joint Accreditation System of Australia and New Zealand, which is responsible for providing accreditation, certification, and inspection to ISO standards. So this has kind of revolutionized the New Zealand wool industry, and is really a model of moving to a farm assurance program and better both environmental practices and animal welfare practices. It is a model to the rest of the world as being the first fully functional, top-down, sustainable and ongoing program of its kind. In addition to all of that, in the modernization of their wool industry, New Zealand is, this isn't new to New Zealand, but they've begun to really take advantage of the fact that co-ops are part of their farming history. So a cooperative is a member-owned and controlled business that operates democratically. Cooperatives return surplus revenues to their members in proportion to their use of the co-op. And in general, this means that members can purchase, import and purchase goods for their farms communally to bring costs down, and they can pool their products and export them in a block to take advantage of pricing, shipping pricing, and to help control the market. So you don't have one farmer pitted against another in terms of pricing. New Zealand's history with cooperatives dates back to the mid-1800s, when British settlers formed cooperatives for both consumers and producers. The first being the Nelson Building Society, established in 1864. Next came the Otago Cooperative Cheese Company, established in 1871, which was the first producer cooperative and is considered to be the first cooperative dairy factory in the Southern Hemisphere. Founded in 1928 as the Public Service Investment Society, Cooperative Bank lent money to public servants and was, one of the first cooperative banks. In 1936, New Zealand Cooperative Women's Guild was founded to promote the formation of new guilds and to link existing ones together. Then in 1981, the New Zealand Agricultural Cooperative Association was established to bring agricultural co-ops together. And the organization has changed its name several times and is currently known as Cooperative Business New Zealand. And you'll see later on when we talk about the sheep a little bit more that this model is used in the sheep industry to a really good advantage. In 2014, the UN Department of Economics and Social Affairs named New Zealand the world's most cooperative economy, which, you know, in lieu of everything else we've talked about, really speaks to ways that economies can move forward by having producers working together. And the wool industry is definitely in line to be doing that more and more in New Zealand. Excuse me, I need a little water here. Any questions so far? Now we can talk about sheep. So within that whole national structure, what's happening with sheep? Still, this all of that, you know, history, and, you know, it's a little dry, you know, where the country is going economically and agriculturally. How can they have an agricultural economy that survives without, like here in America, heavy investment by the government to just sustain farms or to pay farms to throw out produce? New Zealand is looking for ways to thrive and to be profitable. So so they're working together. They're getting people to work together at the individual farm level, then at the county and district levels, and then you know, on the exporting level more nationally. And it's so far working for them. So New Zealand does farm a bunch of different sheep breeds, and I'm just gonna okay, we're gonna go to sheep breeds first and then talk about the wool after that. So the Corriedale was New Zealand's first original sheep breed. Its origins lie in early experiments crossing merinos with long wool breeds. And maybe someone here could guess why you would want to do that. Someone who maybe was here for the Polwarth story or the Perrendale story. Anybody? Can you guess? Anybody? The thing about merinos, while their fleece is beautiful and fine and soft, they require they don't require coddling so much as they do require to be grass fed. They don't tolerate heat very well. They don't climb hills very well because they're so freaking heavy. So they need, you know, they needed to be improved. And so New Zealand farmers took it upon themselves to tackle this project, specifically one producer named James Little. He managed the Corriedale station in North Otago. At the time, Corriedale was a place, not a sheep. So Corriedale station existed, you know, in the North Otago region, and he began trying to establish a fixed inbred half-bred. In other words, a half-bred that will consistently breed again, true to type. And in 1868, he mated over 600 merino ewes with Romney rams. So he used a Romney as his first test case. There was at the time a lot of debate about whether a sheep like this could even be bred. It was known that sheep could be crossbred to produce animals for fattening for meat, but many argued that when breeding for wool, there was too much variation after the first cross, to keep inbreeding it. You would get results that varied too much, so that the fixing a new breed wouldn't be able to be established. Experts from England, Europe, and New Zealand doubted that anyone could develop a half breed, and they commiserated about it and talked about it and argued about it. And then James Little just went ahead and did it. So he, after his initial Merino Romney trial, he continued his experiments by crossing long wool Lincoln and Leicester Rams with Merinos, and he really liked the results of that. And so the Corriedale, which is basically a Lincoln Merino cross, was established during his second round of experiments. And as we know from talking about other yarns in Barn Box, the Lincoln long wool is a super kind of a super breed in terms of its genetics. Its genetics are both stable and assertive. So when you're crossing sheep by using Lincolns to cross with other breeds, you're I don't mean this the way it's going to sound. You're injecting genetics into the mix that will dominate. They tend to not overpower necessarily, but their genetics are very strong and healthy, and the genetics that they bring to a mix when they assert themselves and dominate, it's for the good. So if in your Merino sheep you're trying to breed for longer legs or more agility or fiber that's a little bit stronger or has better range of color, a Lincoln is a good choice. Also longer staple length, obviously. The Lincoln long wool producing one of the longest coats. Okay. Meanwhile, at another sheep station, level station, Mr. William Davidson began a similar breeding program in 1874, also using Lincoln Rams. So by the 1890s, only 25 years after the first experiments began, the inbred half-bred was already widely known as the Corriedale, and this name stuck. It was officially sanctioned by the New Zealand Sheep Breeders Association in 1905. So this is another one of those, the Corriedale is another one of those sheep that was able to be, the breeding and the surety of the breeding was able to be established very quickly within 20 to 25 years. And the breed named and entered into the breeding association very soon after. From the beginning, the Corriedale was bred for both meat and wool. It has a longer, it's a medium, it is considered a medium wool, but it has a staple length on the longer side of that, like 6 inches to 7 inches, as opposed to, 3 to 4 inches with a lot of the medium breeds. With its longer staple length and medium fine diameter, plus a very springy, well-defined crimp, Corriedale wool found a ready market in the worsted wool trade. Worsted trade mostly referring to fabrics and things for clothing at the time. In addition, the Corriedale is more prolific. It's more likely to have offspring that are twins than the Merino, and its lambs mature earlier and produce a very well-muscled carcass. So very good for meat production, as well as wool. The Corriedale was bred in the plains and gentle hills of the drier eastern districts of both North and South Islands. The breed is also farmed in North and South America, Australia, and Eastern Europe today. It now vies with the Merino as the world's most popular sheep breed. By the early 2000s, there were approximately 2.8 million Corriedales in New Zealand and 100 million worldwide. So they don't even have the largest percentage of Corriedales in New Zealand. But there are a lot of them. And I have spun some really nice Corriedale wool. It's one of my favorite fibers to hand spin because it's so springy. It's quite greasy, which I love for spinning because um, you know, it's easier to control the fiber when it's greasy, as long as the grease hasn't hardened. And then when you wash it and all that grease washes off, it just gets super, it just blows up. It's really nice and shiny, very shiny. The next breed created in New Zealand is called the half bred. That's literally the name of it. The half bred or colonial half bred was developed in an attempt to retain merino wool quality, their foraging ability, and their hardiness while increasing lamb production and improving its carcass conformation for the meat trade. Unlike the Corriedale, which was inbred after the initial cross of a merino and a long wool, in the half bred, the merino genes are maintained ongoing. So the you're constantly crossing a merino with another half bred type of sheep. So a merino would be crossed with a Romney or an English Leicester to produce a first cross half bred ram, and then that ram will be mated with a half bred ewe flock. So the half bred tolerates higher conditions than the Corriedale and is farmed in the South Island foothills and high country. Going back just a step to that mating sequence, the half-bred ram is half merino and the half-bred ewe is half merino. So you're still maintaining in the offspring half merino genetics. And you might remember a couple of times we've talked about mule sheep and the fact that hill sheep are often used, hill sheep ewes are often used for this very purpose, for providing offspring for the meat market or the wool market. And so you got to have hill sheep if you're going to do half breds. So, but first we'll talk about the New Zealand Romney, which is a Romney sheep, obviously, but like other sheep we've talked about, so Romneys are let me step back. Romneys are a British breed, and they originated in the Kent region of Great Britain, which is marshy wetland, close to the ocean. The weather is very harsh in that area. The ground is cold and wet, and so the sheep have developed with long wool, long luster wool, really good hooves that are resistant to hoof rot, and the ability to tolerate very cold and windy conditions and to exist on marshy grasses and walk in soil that isn't very stable. So, but Romneys have been such a popular breed. They've been shipped all over the world, and particularly early on in the Australian and New Zealand sheep industry were brought into those areas to help provide diversity, to be able to raise a stronger wool product than the merinos were producing. So Romneys were transported from Great Britain to the colonies in Australia and New Zealand, where they began to feed and exist on the grasses, the hillsides, the valleys, and in the weather of those places, which is drastically different than in England. So eventually they began to develop traits that were different than the UK Romney. So when English breeders shifted their emphasis from wool to meat production, Romney sheep got bigger, but the wool quality declined. Early photos of Romneys shipped to New Zealand show big, bold sheep with clean face and legs, very well suited to the hills and hard country of the of New Zealand and Australia. By the early 1900s, the Romney in New Zealand looked distinctly different than that Kentish Romney from which it was bred, although the name New Zealand Romney was not formally adopted until the mid 1900s. So once the sheep got to New Zealand, New Zealand farmers will remain very important to New Zealand farmers. So local breeders selected their sheep for both wool and meat production. By the 1960s, the Romneys in New Zealand were shorter in the legs, narrower in the pelvis, and covered in wool from its nose all the way to its toes. So quite different looking, very fluffy, and shorter. Over the years, the stud industry has concentrated on the breed's physical appearance, ignoring its productive qualities. So the breed's vigor and hardiness and its fertility did decline. The Romney is suited to high rainfall and heavy soil and has the highest resistance to foot rot of any breed in New Zealand. It grows a heavy fleece used in carpets, furnishings, and knitting yarns. The Romney was the single most popular breed in New Zealand through the 20th century, making up 68% of the national flock by the early 2000s. So Romney is a big ticket sheep down there. Next, we move on to the Perrendale. Farmers were frustrated that the modern New Zealand Romneys were struggling in the hill country after breeding them to, have shorter legs and a heavier body. Then they became frustrated that they couldn't climb hills anymore. So Geoffrey Perrin experimented with crossing the quick, smaller, hardy Cheviot hill sheep over the Romney ewes to produce his Perrendale sheep, which was registered as a separate breed in 1960. Perrendale is one of the breeds we've done in the Wool Along. So you might remember it from there if you have participated in that. It's kind of it produces a golden brown, shiny fleece. It's very soft, very nice. Perrendales are naturally more fertile than Romneys, hardier, better at foraging, and require less shepherding. Now a popular dual purpose sheep in the North Island, as well as in colder, wet areas of the South Island. In the early 2000s, there were 3 to 4 million Perrendales in New Zealand. And I'm going through a short list of sheep. There are only 2 more I'm going to run on about, but there are actually probably 20 or 25 very popular breeds that are farmed throughout New Zealand. And these are just the top ones of those. The next one is the Drysdale, named for a researcher named F.W. Dry, who began to look into the inherited traits of wool at Massey College. He found that some Romney sheep were genetically disposed to producing a heavily, what they call a heavily medullated fleece or hairy fleece, and that this fleece was useful in carpets, but not necessarily desirable for, the softer wool that could be used in clothing. So the Drysdale breed was commercially established in the 1960s to produce the coarsest wool of any sheep in New Zealand. We're very used to talking about breeding for softer and finer wool on a continual basis, but it kind of makes you realize we do need that coarse wool for things. And it is really useful to have the coarsest wool possible when spinning wool for carpets or maybe for upholsteries, or maybe for embedding into other building materials like acoustic tiles and things like wall finishes and flooring. So Drysdale produced the coarsest wool of any sheep, and because the fleece grows so fast, it is usually shorn twice a year. It is also raised for meat. Numbers stand at about 6 to 700,000 in the early 2000s. And finally, the Coopworth. The Coopworth is also a breed that was established in New Zealand from a cross between a Romney and a Border Leicester by Ian Coop of Lincoln College in the 1960s. This is another breed we've done in the past that we've explored this yarn before in our clubs. Drysdale breed was commercially established in the 1960s. Oh, I'm sorry, I lost my place. Let's see. Okay, so the Coopworth was also established in the 1960s. The Border Leicester added fertility and mothering ability to the mix of Romney traits. And I'd like to add also color. Romneys are already colored, but Border Leicester adds more color genes and can kind of fix, if you're breeding for color, it can kind of help out with that. And if you really want darker fiber, which for the rug industry would be really useful, and you want to fix that as a standard, then mixing these two breeds together is a good bet. The breed replaced the Romney in the wetter areas of New Zealand and in the hill countries because of its improved productivity. National Coopworth flock was around 7 million in the early 2000s. Sheep with naturally colored wool you can find them in almost any breed. Some of the modern breeds are definitely, that's definitely disqualifying. And for the most part, in any breed, just in a very large scale view, they're considered without commercial value for wool production. As in the United States, though, while breeding for color is a growing commercial advantage, in New Zealand, high quality colored sheep are often kept and bred for their wool, which has both commercial and handcraft uses. Growers in New Zealand recognized fairly early on, from the 1970s, that there is a handcraft industry that needs to be supplied with wool, both at the level of individually handcrafting and the small business type of handcrafting. Like, we would be considered part of that industry. We're not producing yarn for masses and masses of people. We're always just looking for to make small batches of everything. And having a community of producers that focuses on color fiber is very helpful, because handcrafters love all the natural colors that can be produced from wool. So New Zealand recognized this pretty early on. The producers in the United States are starting to see that it's really an advantage for them as well to go in this direction, at least in part. Among the most favored breeds for color production are Merino, Romney, Corriedale, Polwarth, and English Leicester. And this is in New Zealand we're talking about. although interest in other breeds such as the Gotland and the Arapawa is increasing. Many naturally colored sheep in New Zealand are a cross between two or more breeds, and their characteristics can range across the parent breeds. And to that end, people who raise sheep for color are probably more tolerant of variations, generational variations between different crosses. So they're not as interested in fixing a certain color coming all the time or a certain pattern of sheep always being produced at the level that that we're talking about to feed into the handcraft industry. Sheep inherit from their parents the genes that make them naturally colored and or patterned. The color can be black, darker light gray, or darker light brown. Most colored sheep become lighter as they age. As far as patterns, there are many possible patterns. All white is a pattern. All black is a pattern. Although sometimes a nearly all black or what appears to be an all black sheep is really genetically a white sheep with one really big black spot on its body. So the patterning and the color are determined by the actual genetics, not by the appearance of the sheep. But some patterns include like spots, which is called piebald, different shapes of color in the face or on the ears, underbelly of one color over the top of another color. Those are all different patterns that can be seen. And in some breeds exhibit many of them, the Shetland breed being one, the Icelandic breed being another, are breeds that patterning is part of the overall breed genetics. Each breed produces wool that is suitable for particular purposes. Good management also plays a big part, ensuring that wool is sound and free of contaminants, such as vegetable matter. The way that wool is handled at shearing time is also very important. You don't want a shearer that needs to cut twice and gets little shortcuts into the market bag. You want really clean shearing of a full staple of wool. The best known use for natural color wool, like I said, is handcrafts. Spinners, weavers, needle felters, knitters, crocheters, and other wool crafters value the colored wool for its natural depth, lack of dye, and other chemicals. Some breeders export fleece and carded wool for handcrafts to other countries, and this is a niche market for top quality fleeces. And there are several farms and companies in New Zealand and Australia that specialize. When we talked about the Polworth sheep, you might remember we talked about Wendy and her quest to really create colored Polworth sheep and to, breed them into a large enough population to make a thing to make colored Polworth a thing. And it was very she had a lot of foresight, because when the wool market plummeted after the 1970s, her colored sheep kind of rescued their company and took over as one of their main most profitable exports. So that other people in New Zealand and Australia took note of that kind of success and began exploring that option for themselves, to our benefit here at Barenaked Wools, I might add, because not so much that we rarely bring in fleece from New Zealand, but the idea that it can be done, traveled to the United States with the first sheep of some of these breeds, and as they're bred here, farmers here are learning from farmers in New Zealand that this can actually be a profitable sector, feeding the handcraft industry. And luckily, we have plenty of handcrafters in the United States and plenty of places to platform farm goods to them that it is catching on here. We also are lucky to have a lively community of mills here that individual farmers can send their clip to be processed into yarn that they then can sell themselves. So because we have all that sort of small level manufacturing, it's not as important for farmers here to form co-ops as it is in a country like New Zealand, where wool mills exist only near ports and they're very far away, and you have to have a lot of wool to get a place on the production line. And so, you know, the economics of getting your wool to the mill kind of determines what kind of economic plan you choose, whether you go with a co-op or you try to do it on your own. Anyway, in New Zealand, colored wool is also processed by commercial manufacturers into yarn and made into woven or knitted garments, blankets, rugs, and other items. These native wool products command high prices in the export and tourist markets. Natural colored knitting yarn is popular in New Zealand and overseas. And natural colored wool can be blended with other domestic specialty fibers such as alpaca, mohair, and possum in the making of luxury yarns and products. Furthermore, both commercial enterprises and handcrafters find that by overdying natural colored wool, they can obtain a beautiful range of interesting, soft colors with beautiful depth. There's a small but growing demand as well for natural colored sheepskins. As with handcraft wool, there are specific requirements if quality skins are to be produced. And for people, this may sound just macabre, as a product, but for people who are raising, I mean, all of the sheep that you farm as a farmer are not going to be good wool sheep. Their fleeces vary within a flock, no matter how well you breed. And it's always an ongoing experiment and process. Plus, there are climatic and health issues that arise that impact the quality of the fleece. For instance, ewes don't produce great fleece when they are also producing offspring. So lots of times the ewes are weeded out and sent to market at after a year or two of producing offspring, so that they can profit from them, in the meat market. And when they do, the skins from those animals that are going to market can be harvested as an additional product, thus, not wasting anything. So as while it might sound kind of horrific, it is another way to stay profitable as a farm, and if you're going to kill an animal, that as little as possible of it goes to waste in any way. The Black and Colored Sheep Breeders Association of New Zealand was founded in 1976 because of the growing number of farms focusing on colored fiber. And they have members ranging from small block owners to those with large commercial flocks. Some produce wool for use in their own handcrafts, such as felting, spinning, and weaving, or to sell on to other craftspeople. And other members are involved in commercial production of natural colored wool products, or they breed for high quality sheepskins. Some members don't even own sheep, but have an interest in natural colored wool for other reasons. Maybe they are commercial purveyors of products. Shared objectives include producing the best quality sheep and wool and promoting colored wool for its special qualities. There's a registered purebred section within the society, and that aims to produce and record sheep that display the best characteristics of their breed. Now, all of that background and all of that running on and on about different kinds of sheep is to basically point to the fact that this yarn is spun from a blend of different fibers that probably came through a co-op of some kind or another, probably through the dark wool, this Black and Colored Sheep Association. It is likely that it has a high, from everything we just heard, likely has a very high percentage of Romney wool and or sheep with Romney genetics, as well as merino component. So when you squeeze it and feel it, you can feel that kind of crunchiness of the Romney wool and the soft springiness of softer wool like merino or a merino Romney mix, a half bred. Other sheep that they farm in New Zealand also include many of the hill sheep like Dorsets and Oxmoors and Oxfords. So you're probably getting a little bit of that in the blend as well. And if you notice, this yarn has a sheen to it as well. So that's the thing that makes me think additionally that it's got a high Romney content, and maybe not merino, but Corriedale, which is nice and bouncy. But the twist of it has a nice, it's not too relaxed of a twist. It's got a nice round kind of profile for something that's a long wool yarn. And the plies themselves have a bouncy kind of airy quality. I found it to be very airy to knit with and wash. So when I was swatching with it and developing the design, I had to really, I way overestimated the needle size that I would want to use with it. I was thinking, it's sport yarn, a size 6. I'll start with a size 6. Well, on size 6 needles, I got a very kind of a lot of wayward stitches of different sizes that wanted to move around, and they were a little bit misshapen because there's a lot of active springiness in this yarn. I ended up going down quite a bit to more and more liking the fabric I was getting on size 3 and 4 needles as opposed to 5 and 6 needles. And still, even on the smaller needles, the fabric is very airy and breathable and quite lightweight. So, I found that pleasing. And that's kind of where all of this comes together, is that all of these different breeds being farmed across New Zealand, many of them in smaller farms, some of them in bigger farms. Those farmers are taking advantage of the cooperative tradition in their country to put their wool together and process it and sell it on as processed fiber, which is how this came to us. So this fiber was purchased by our mill as clean roving in a roving state, and then they put it through their own carding and spinning equipment to align the fibers, the way that they do for their equipment. It's not combed. There's quite a bit of Kemp in it, so that if you've got it in your hand, these white fibers that you can easily pull out, that's what's known as Kemp. It's a protein fiber, but that's that medullated fiber that I was referring to, which occurs in some fleeces. It's coarse and a little bit wiry. Here's one here. I hope you can see that. It's got crimp, but it's like a straight fiber with a little bit of crimp. And it's very papery feeling. And it breaks easily too. A lot of that falls out when you're knitting with it or when you launder your piece. In this case, I did not find that it made for a prickly surface or that it in any way made the fabric feel more itchy or anything like that. You can pull it out as you go if you don't like it, or you can knit it in and forget about it. It's really up to you what you do with that. So in New Zealand, the wool the wool that comes into the co-op stations is categorized by the diameter of the fibers and falling into three main types, like I said before: fine, medium, and strong, which are measured in microns. A micron is 1/1,000,000th of a meter. And fine wool is wool that has a micron count of less than 24. And merino falls into that bucket. Now you can get and within classing wools, you can get wool that's merino simply because it is less than 24 micron fiber. That doesn't mean its genetics are 100% merino necessarily. So, but it has all the characteristics of pure merino wool. Merino wool accounts for about 10% of New Zealand's sheep population. So super soft and delicate. Merino is perfect for clothing that lies against the skin. And while it is super soft, it's also very light, and it lacks the protective qualities of heavier fibers. So it's susceptible to pilling and wear. Excuse me. And when I say it lacks the protective qualities, it is very greasy. So it does have the protection of grease on its side in terms of keeping the fiber moist and supple. But its cuticle is short and thinner and softer. So the shaft of the fiber doesn't have the same protection as a long fiber would, with longer scales along its shaft. Hardier wool is used for home goods and outerwear and is a New Zealand stalwart. So the Romney and Romney Cross wool. In New Zealand, Romney is classed as strong wool with a micron count of 31 or more. So it has a thicker diameter than merino, but it possesses a lot of the same great qualities. It is more weighty. It's sturdier. It provides a beautiful textural element to finished fabrics, which you might even see some of that in knitted fabric. A little bit of a shimmer or a little bit of a, I don't know what to call it, just like a shantung kind of texture to the finished fabric. And that occurs because of its super springy texture, or its super springy nature. It defies being shaped by knitting needles and even by blocking in some ways. And so its stitches sometimes maintain a little bit of a erratic quality, which give the surface of a fabric a little bit of a texture. The extra weight contributes as well to the fabric falling nicely and draping beautifully. Being what is it, 68% of the exported fiber, it still is not, as high profit as merino per pound. So a lot of it does get shipped out, but some of it stays in the country as well. And I just wanted to say too that those are traits that belong to the New Zealand Romney, which is bred also for meat and for wool that is intended to be stronger. Here in the United States, and the Romney that we use in our Kent yarn line is much, much softer and silkier. United States farmers are focusing much, much more on beautiful fiber. And the farmer that we work with in particular, I think it's one main farmer, and we have a couple other farms that contribute to that line. I mean, they are super focused on really soft, silky Romney fiber. So we're not really talking about the same wool, Romney wool from New Zealand as we are from the United States, or what you might be familiar with through us or other providers. Then overall, the New Zealand Sheep Breeders Association, not the Colored and Black Sheep Association, but the overarching association, the national entity, is responsible for managing sheep breeding in the country, as well as stud breeding or sheep raised for proliferating, as well as that. It ensures the purity of created breeds. The ones that I went through before, that list, are all New Zealand or origin fibers. So it ensures the purity of those breeds by documenting pedigree and maintaining records of performance, like prizes, prices, and quality control. And it encompasses all the different breed associations as well. So the 20 developed breeds reported by the association include Border Leicester, Borderdale, Corriedale, Dorper, Dorset Down, East Frisian, English Leicester, Finn Sheep, Hampshire, Lincoln, Oxford, Pole Dorset, Dorset Horn, Polwarth, Ryland, Shropshire, South Suffolk, Suffolk, and Texel. So all of those breeds have been, at some point or other in history, either originated in New Zealand or brought to New Zealand and nativized to the climate and the available food there, and thus become the New Zealand type of whatever breed they are. So, you know, if you ever travel there, it might be fun to do a little yarn tasting while you're there so that you can compare and contrast when you get home. The breeding varieties, you know, which are crosses, include the Corriedale, the crossbreed of the Merino and English breeds, the New Zealand Romney, Perrendale, and Coopworth. And all of those are raised for both meat and wool. The difference between Australian and New Zealand wool is related to fiber diameter, fiber length, and vegetable matter. Compared to Australian wool, New Zealand wool is stronger, longer, and coarser. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. Compared to Australian wool, New Zealand strong wools are thicker and coarser due to the climate, topography, the land availability, and the purposefulness of the breeding. This makes New Zealand wool preferable for products such as carpets and blankets, while Australian wool is generally used for apparel goods. And this speaks back to what I was just talking about in the difference between the Romney in New Zealand and the Romney in the United States. The New Zealand Romney is by far the heavier, thicker, longer, coarser wool for a reason, and because it's more profitable for them to be that way. The New Zealand Merino clip is approximately 6% the size of the Australian Merino clip, with an average, but the New Zealand clip is 2 microns finer than the Australian clip. So while New Zealand produces much less merino, much less merino than Australia, it is finer and softer. And it makes up 30% of their own exports out of their own country. So New Zealand merino is uniquely fine and also known for its naturally pure white and clean fibers, which reflect the climate. Nutritious soil, plentiful rain, and lots of sun in which the sheep live and thrive. It's also a reflection of the care that they receive. New Zealand's sheep farmers are renowned for complying with some of the highest welfare standards in the world. For example, the country was the first in the world to ban museling, a practice of cutting skin from the hindquarters without painkillers to prevent fly strike. There are also many programs, industry groups, and standards that originated in New Zealand which focus on animal welfare as well as environmental standards. New Zealand wool isn't just a win for quality, it's a win for the environment too. Wool is a natural material which will not pollute the environment with microplastics or exist as waste for decades after it has been discarded. But it has other environmental benefits. One of the foremost being that it's a regenerative product, and when it returns to the earth, it releases valuable nutrients back into the soil. The process of cultivating wool can be regenerative too, because sheep help fertilize the soil, boost biodiversity, conserve water, and protect native species. And when we say, like, when the wool returns to the earth, it brings valuable nutrients back to it. That's not just like a romantic way of saying when we throw out a sweater, it rots into the ground and benefits. There literally are places all over the earth where people are today getting more, they're getting less money to market their wool than it costs to shear the sheep. So shearing must be done for the health of the sheep, and to conserve on shearing costs, farmers shear sheep in the field and discard the wool in the field rather than truck it out, clean it, and try to sell it. So there are places on earth and in the United States where wool is being literally turned back into the soil almost immediately after it comes off of the animal. So that's not just like a romantic phrasing for rot. It actually is a way of fertilizing. And I think there are even products, there are companies trying to market products to consumers called like wool pellets or sheep pellets that you can buy in bags that are literally like the stuff that they pull off the fleeces when they skirt them, which is wool that's embedded with manure, and they roll it up in balls and sell it in bags so that you can spread it around your garden, and helps to maintain damp soil and to fertilize and to keep weeds away, although you would be feeding the weeds at the same time if they could break through. The decline in the number of sheep during the 1980s was followed by a decline in the power and value of the wool industry in New Zealand, but nevertheless, wool suppliers continued to prioritize wool and natural fibers starting in the 1990s because they knew that fashion could be a vehicle for change, working in harmony with nature rather than against it. Ethical fashion producers threw their support behind New Zealand wool to create beautiful, durable knitwear. And as people became aware of the environmental impact of synthetics, these groups continued to lead the way in making their signature with lustrous local fibers. And it's always good to be right there when consumers are ready to take up a flag. It's good to be right there with flags to sell. So the fashion industry really has been working for quite a few decades to come up with standards and best practices and channels and avenues for designers and clothing companies and textile producers to make it easy for them to embrace sustainable fashion. And this is kind of speaking to that. The color of the wool and finished products you buy is directly linked back to the treatment process. Fleece wool is the best wool from the sheep, not, you know, that's the highest grade wool in the fleece, and the wool down around the bottom, the skirting fleece, is the lowest quality and the cheapest. Fleece wool is more expensive but can be used after being only washed or scoured. It can be then go on to be made into yarn and onto textiles or whatever. And it doesn't damage the wool in any way to be washed and cleaned that way. It does not require chemical treatment to be clean. Cheaper, dirty skirting wools must be carbonized. They go through an acid bath to remove dirt, vegetation, and sheep droppings, and that acid bath weakens the wool, but it does leave it snowy white. So the industry kind of struggles to balance that desire for snowy white fleece with the maybe not so well known fact that that fleece has been subjected to and literally drowned in chemicals to remove its vegetable matter and grease and all kinds of things which have weakened the fiber. For yarns that go on to be dyed, the super white underlay is a good thing, but it's not a strong thing. And if you dye on top of that weak fiber, you're just weakening it even more. But our clothing industry, partially being what it is with fast fashion, it's likely that these practices and the cheaper prices that they enable will continue. Naturally washed fleeces, those that have just been washed or scoured, have a creamy color. So when you see yarn with that creamy kind of yellow, even almost an ochre shade to it, you can be assured that those have been naturally washed. That said, New Zealand merino is very white. You can get, for instance, in the Polworth yarn that we carry, is a very white. It's not snow white, but it is, of all the yarns we carry in white, that is the whitest natural wool that we have. Snowy white wools can be found in products from China or in products where New Zealand wool has been processed in China, and indicate a cheaper grade of wool that has been more highly processed to be usable, and therefore has a low strength factor. These products pill easily, lose their shape, and are not durable. A high quality garment made with fleece wool will cost a lot more, but will last for many more years. Another reason that wool is grown and processed in New Zealand and Australia, another reason wool that is grown and processed in New Zealand and Australia brings better prices is that in third world countries, they still use banned chemicals. So in addition to lots of chemicals, a lot of the chemicals they use are banned ones. Many of them have little or no environmental quality control. So they might say that they're not using banned chemicals in their factories, but in the fields where sheep are raised, DDT and other residual chemicals are still in place. Some of the cheaper, poorer quality wool processed in China comes from China itself, but also countries such as Russia and South America, where environmental impact isn't even a consideration. And so, one of the things that you're getting when you buy New Zealand wool is the assurance that all the way down the line, the product has been protected from all of those things, those bad things that can be added when the wool is sourced in a different country but processed in another country, and the only thing that you're told about is the processing end of it. Sheila, did you have something to add? Something just popped up, but I couldn't read it. So
hold on, I'm trying to get to it.
Oh, okay.
What I was wondering is just like with all of the variation, with all of this wool that's sort of coming out of this country and it's going this where and that place to get processed and so forth. How does a consumer know that, oh, New Zealand wool means I'm going to be getting something and it's going to be consistent from year to year? How do you?
Well, just saying that something is made with New Zealand wool doesn't. But if you buy yarn, for instance, that has the New Zealand wool mark, the New Zealand, that overarching organization, what was it called? The Farm Assurance Program actually provides a wool mark for their wool that says it's been that from the soil to the export point, you have that assurance that it's free from banned chemicals or harsh chemicals, that the sheep have been treated well, that the wool is processed in a clean manner, and that biodiversity and environmental care has been taken with it to the export point. And from there, whoever imports it is then responsible for taking over that chain of command and continuing it.
Okay, so
Which in our case, you're getting with our own standards provide that to you. So this yarn for sure has had a careful stewardship from the soil all the way into your hands.
And of course that does not surprise me in any way, shape, or form.
Right. But you can't always know. Yeah.
Yeah. And how are you, if we say, oh my God, Anne, I love this yarn, can we get it again? How can that country say, oh yeah, we know exactly how we produce that yarn, so we can recreate it?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the part that is kind of baffling me, is
and that's where, for our part, as a producer, working directly face to face with mills means that we can ask for the processing that we want.
Okay.
See what I mean?
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. Now, I'm not saying that every fiber we explore, and I know that the mills we work with are all milling the yarn. They're taking on that chain of custody with the responsibility that it will be handled with care between the import and your hands. I'm confident about that. When we source from other places, we don't always know. Like our mill doesn't always know. But when we source from New Zealand, we know. And our mills do understand that that's what we want. When they source for us, they know we're going to be far more interested in sources that are committed to a healthy chain of command of the fiber, taking care of the fiber from the farm up.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I hope that helps answer.
It did. Thank you very much.
I mean, most of the time we're getting wool from a specific farm, but lots of times when we're dealing with, as we did in this year's Barn Box, we dealt with a lot of fiber from offshore. And in other countries, they just do things differently. We don't have that cooperative economy that almost every other country has when it comes to textiles. Where, I mean, everywhere, even India, their collection of silk is monitored and safeguarded by the Silk Board of India. We just don't have that here. The British Wool Board, Prince Charles has his organization overseeing, the well-being of wool, not just in Great Britain, but also in countries, including New Zealand, that are partners with Great Britain. So you've got some wonderful forces out there in the world ensuring that even though you're buying from a wool pool, you're buying from a good wool pool. Um, and we don't bring we don't bring wool from China or Russia or anything like that. So at least for the time being, that's not a consideration for us right now.
That's very helpful that there are other countries doing the same type of thing. I kind of forget that.
Yeah,
But
I mean,
thank you.
when we studied the Punta Arenas, it's the same thing there. They've got a huge wool pool that they're working through, and the sheep that they breed there are all of these merino mixes, and they mix together all the merino mix wool so that it produces this one lovely product, the Punta Arenas wool. Any other questions about the I know this was a little bit of a departure from our usual sort of romance with a individual sheep breed, but it's kind of interesting to understand how a huge, I mean, the wool industry in New Zealand and Australia is so huge. We can't even conceive of it, something like that here. And it's kind of interesting to see what a beautiful product can be produced from such a massive industrial level of sheep farming, if that makes sense.
Is that, you mentioned that the fellow that was kind of originated was named Lytle?
Little
Little.
James Little.
So is that where the Littletons?
Oh, I was gonna get to that in a sec.
Okay.
James Little, yeah. That's Little, so it's not spelled the same. So yes. So my design is the Littleton Dicky. I just been wanting to do a Dicky for a couple of years. And when we were talking about this yarn, when we got this samples of this yarn, we loved it. We loved the softness and the color. And I said, let's do that in a sport weight, and I'll design a Dicky for it. So this is and you know what's interesting is being able to see the different, look at the stitch definition with the light on it. I mean, it's just really good. Even though I wouldn't look at this yarn and say, oh, crisp stitch definition, but it's pretty good. And part of that is it has a little bit of a sheen to it, so it's highlighting the cables, but it's just got a nice bouncy character, and it makes the pattern stand up off the fabric. So the cables and the purl stitches really stand kind of proud of the fabric. I named it the Littleton Dicky because the Littleton Harbor, Littleton is a wool exporting area, and the harbor there exports a huge amount of New Zealand's wool. So New Zealand is a country, unlike our country, the interior of New Zealand is dense with, it isn't very developed, and the development is all around the outside of New Zealand, which protects the inner part. So, and again, in order to get your wool off the island, basically, you have to bring it or get it to a port. And for many people, that means you have to join a co-op in your local area so that wool can be pooled and transported economically to a port or to a mill. And the mills are all in the port areas. So the port of Littleton is one of the major areas where wool goes in and out of New Zealand. Bluff Harbor also another big one. So that's where the kind of name of the design came. But the idea for the design came much, much further ahead a long time ago. And then I just played around with different cables to figure out, what I wanted. And by the way, Elizabeth found a small error in a cable cross in the pattern. So if you already downloaded your pattern before yesterday afternoon, you might want to go retrieve the update to it, which everyone who bought one or downloaded one got an email telling you to update. And it's been corrected now in the chart and the written instructions. So both on Ravelry and on our website. So if you didn't get an email, or you can't figure it out, let us know and we'll just send you one. Okay. Any questions, Audrey?
I have a question. Yeah, I happen to be sitting right next to my Corriedale and my Perrindale,
Uh-huh.
and I held them up next to this. Now, the Corriedale is a worsted weight, and the Perrindale was DK.
Uh-huh.
But you said this sport, you used a smaller needle for it.
Yes.
So it's more like sport is lighter than DK, correct?
Correct.
So closer to fingering?
Yeah, it's between a fingering and a DK.
And a DK. So I was looking at a couple of patterns, and I would love to do the hourglass throw with this, but would that work?
Well, you can, I mean, it's a flat piece. You can make it with that yarn. You would want to swatch maybe the cable and just see what needle size you'd want to use.
Okay.
I think, what did I use for this? A size 5?
Size 4. It
A
said
size
on
4.
here.
Okay.
Yeah, and it says size 9 on that. I think that I was looking through different patterns.
Because the hourglass was designed for a worsted
A
weight.
worsted weight, yeah.
With
So
yarn.
it would be better to be looking for a pattern that perhaps is more like a sport weight or a fingering weight.
Correct.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. I think you could easily use this sport weight in a fingering weight pattern, but probably not. But it's so airy and light, I think it probably wouldn't, you might not be able to get it to knit to a DK gauge.
Okay.
And for everyone else, what I'm talking about there is that oftentimes if you play around with yarn and different needle sizes, you can get the gauge you want, even though the stated weight of the yarn isn't what's called for in the pattern.
Right.
So, I mean,
And
you can, because of the structure of this yarn and how it has that halo, and I think you could knit this in a fairly airy way so that it was practically semi-sheer and still have a fairly stable fabric. It would just be super lightweight, and it might not have the density for something like a blanket or a wrap. But a shawl would be really pretty in this,
Right. Okay.
can
Sally?
you show the back of the Dickie?
Yeah,
And
it's the same as the front.
it goes the same length.
Yeah, and at the top, it's the front has a neck shaping, and the back goes all the way up, but it has the same pattern.
Nice. Okay.
Now that
Thank
works.
You can make this any length. If you wanted something shorter, you could eliminate, one repeat of the pattern, or if you wanted it to go all the way down to the waist, you could add a repeat of the pattern.
Now,
I just
and
started
that
my
looks
second
very
repeat.
dense.
Oh, it's not though. I mean, let me hold it up and see. Can you see through it here?
Okay.
You can kind of see through it when I hold it up.
Thank you.
It's really pretty fluid.
I just started the second repeat and I can attest to that. It's not, and it's going to change with blocking, of course, but
It doesn't have a lot of weight.
yeah, it's nice and it feels good. So
Now, the one that I
good.
knit with the Festivus Sport does feel weightier. I mean, its total weight is the same. I use one skein for each of these, but it feels denser. So, and I think that's just because the yarn is 3-ply and it's more, compacted. So, any other questions?
Thank you.
Oh, let me just, I don't have a ton of news. We'll be starting our sweater knit along, our winter sweater knit along in January, so that's coming up. We've got Black Friday specials coming up next weekend, including our holiday barn box, which is something we do every year as a one-off purchase. It's not part of the barn box subscription. It is something that you can purchase additionally as a gift for someone, or if you just want to have it yourself. So Black Friday specials are coming up next weekend. We're in the middle of our Red Scarf fundraiser. If you don't know about it or you haven't looked into it yet, please do. It's we're selling ebooks, patterns, entry to our knit along, and yarn, all to raise money for a scholarship for foster care to success. And the white Dicky was knit with the sport weight Festivus yarn this year. The Festivus yarn is absolutely luscious. It's just delicious, and Elizabeth can also attest to that because she knit something with it. It's really lovely.
Yeah, you all need to get a skein of it and knit the wood stacking cowl because you'll always want to wear it because I don't have it on. For some reason, I don't have it on. I wear it around the house because it keeps my neck warm.
It
You know,
is really,
Yes,
really,
everybody needs
really
to get a
nice.
skein and do the
And
wood.
there's a whole collection of designs created for the Festivus yarn by myself and fellow designers. Just really beautiful things this year. So please go explore that and tell someone you know about it. Even if they're not a knitter, they can contribute a few bucks and it will help a foster kid in college to get a few steps further in their education. So we really appreciate that. All right, happy Thanksgiving, everybody, and I hope I get to see you before the new year, but if not, I'll see you in the new year.